With me right now, Walter Isaacson, professor of history at Tulane University, former CEO of CNN. He actually hired me. He's also the author of numerous best-selling books about Leonardo da Vinci, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and others. Also here, Connie Chung, former co-anchor of the CBS Evening News. She was also an anchor here at CNN, as well as ABC and NBC News. She's the author of the book Connie, a Memoir. CNN contributor Kara Swisher. She hosts the podcast On and Pivot. Former Univision anchor Jorge Ramos, CNN's Abby Phillip, anchor of Newsnight, and Bret Stephens, opinion columnist for The New York Times. Walter, what do you think the resonance of Edward R. Murrow is today?
When I saw this play, it sort of blew me away that they could have been planning this for so long, and then it was so timely.
It was written 20 years ago.
I know. It was written 20 years ago for the movie. I'm sure the stage play was in the works for the past year or so, and yet it was so timely. The things, the institutions being attacked, and the need for the press to stand up the way Edward R. Murrow did. And you're watching what's happening at CBS, and they're trying to make that judgment. You saw what happened at ABC.
I want to read something that you have actually written. You said a news media that repeatedly betrays its promise to play it straight impoverishes and coarsens the discourse of democracy. A news media that tries to substitute capital T truth on hot-button issues like race relations and climate change for the humbler truths of cold facts and diverse views will alienate the very audiences it most needs to win over.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's sadly true. You know, the 19th century American journalism was advocacy journalism, for better or worse. 20th century journalism after Walter Lippmann was mostly objective journalism. And I think one of the problems that we have in the media today is this, to borrow a term from Jewish dietary laws, it's this mixing of milk and meat. There's too much advocacy journalism in what's supposed to be objective journalism. And then you see advocacy organizations also trying to do kind of objective reporting. And I think the public has become confused. It's difficult for them to understand what journalism ought to be. I think news organizations like CNN, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, mainstream news organizations have to be exceptionally vigilant about keeping their opinions to themselves. Reporters should wake up every day and say, I am paid not to have an opinion. And I think that trust has been too often betrayed in the last few decades.
But sometimes you have to take a stand. Sometimes you really have to take a stand when it comes to racism, discrimination, corruption, public lies, dictatorships, human rights, the destruction of the environment. You have to take a stand as a journalist. And if we don't take a stand, if we don't challenge and question those who are in power, then who's going to do it? And I think the trust depends precisely on that, not only on reporting reality as it is, but on challenging those who are in power. And if people, the audience doesn't...
The question is, are you taking a stand equally when it's a Republican in office or when it's a Democrat in the White House?
We should.
Of course.
Yeah,
but of course that doesn't happen. And that's part of the problem, and that's part of the legitimacy of the conservative complaint about too much news media. The exhibit A being the health of our former president.
I don't think viewers or readers are confused. They want facts, and they believe certain organizations are giving them the facts. We need to just abide by the truth, which is what Murrow did, what Cronkite did.
I do think that I have a little bit of a quibble with this idea that it's a desire for objective journalism that's driving down trust in media. Because what we've also seen in that same time frame is the rise of non-objective media, of opinion journalism, really overtaking so-called objective media. So I don't think those two things can happen at the same time if you feel like people are going toward, news sources that have no opinions or what you might think are no opinions. So look, media is flawed. We're not going to get it right every time. We're not going to be perfect every time. The difference between what the media is supposed to do and what everybody on social media and on Substack and anybody who has a cell phone can do is that we have a mechanism, or we're supposed to have a mechanism for correcting our mistakes. That's the difference. It's not the absence of mistakes. It's a mechanism for correcting them. And yes, I do think doing a better job of playing it, calling the balls and strikes, put it that way, on both sides or all sides of debates is important. But I do think that there are many people out there who are taking the reduction of trust in the media and using it as an excuse to spread falsehoods. And they're gaining huge audiences for that, because I think it is incredibly comforting to people to hear things that reinforce their existing views.
It's important to make a distinction between truth and facts. We have a responsibility to facts, and those are ascertainable, relatively objective, and we have a responsibility to assembling those facts in a way that is comprehensive, fair, coherent, and maybe has some predictive value in telling our readers what's important, what are they going to need to know tomorrow. But I think one of the ways in which we have gone wrong is we have mistaken facts for truth. That is to say, we're responsible for standing up for one moral issue or another. Now, in our private lives, that's how we may feel and feel very strongly. But when we arrogate that kind of truth enterprise to ourselves, we are disrespecting our audience. We ought to be presenting them with facts so they can make up their own minds. And when we don't do that, they feel cheated, misled, and they become distrustful. And that distrust is what has led to this world of sort of alternative facts, everyone's own truth, a kind of anarchy.
Because it's flooded, Brad, because it's flooded the zone. I mean, it's like, I just, Mountainhead, if anyone's watched it, is terrific. One of the lines is, information cancer, and that's what's happened. There's all this cancer. One of the characters is an AI person. He says, I have the cure. And
This is a new show on Max.
On Max, which is terrific.
Succession.
Right. And one of the we are in a situation of flooding the zone, and so it's not the same thing. And I don't think they sit there, they're flooded almost constantly. And so one of the points is to pull it out and try to give people some guidance. And I do think that it's a very different information environment now with all the misinformation, especially when it comes from the top.
Well, Brett, I feel like I want to understand better what you think is the distinction between facts and truth. What is a truth that is not also a fact?
Oh, I mean, a truth is essentially in the eye of the beholder. A truth is a subjective moral concept about what set of facts you assemble into a reality that's your own. And that's for philosophers to discuss. What we should be doing.
What Trump is
Well,
doing.
let me give you a hypothetical scenario.
That's his truth, right?
No, that's his truth. And we're in the business
we cannot think
of
that's
offering
Can I
facts.
Let him finish.
Can I offer a hypothetical scenario?
Please.
I mean, what about the concept of rule of law? Is that a fact or is that a truth?
Well, of course, rule of law is a value which I care deeply about, and I hope all of us do. Within the rule of law, you can contend about what actually ought to be the rule of law. But that kind of value advocacy ends up when we substitute our points of view about what the rule of law ought to be for what other people might think it ought to be. That cheapens the currency that we're dealing with, because people will look at what someone in the news presents as a truth. Usually it comes with an adjective. It's racist, it's misogynist, whatever, right? And they'll say, well, hang on a second. I have a different view based on a set of facts, and this is a legitimate difference of opinion. And when we stop serving just as sort of the purveyors of what is sort of the bricks of fact, trying to build a kind of idea of what we're doing brick by brick, by simply saying
no place in the news.
But
Opinion has virtually no place in the news. We cannot have opinion when we're providing information.
But since we're talking about Edward R. Murrow, and in this play, there are some real concrete examples here. The first case that they talk about is the case of a man who was being discharged from the military, not because of his own actions, but because of those of his family members. And so the question that they raise in the broadcast is whether this is a violation of his rights and whether his due process rights are as important, maybe more important than the threat of communism. To me, that is a quintessential question that goes at truth, not just a set of facts. It asks a question about values. And so I do think, I think it's an interesting point that you're making, and I think it's something that I'm still thinking about. But if we are also talking about the Murrow era as the golden age of this type of journalism, you have to contend with the fact that he was dealing with values and not just with throwing out facts to the audience, but he was asking the question of Americans, what is more important to you? And what should be aligned with democratic principles? Because we live in this democracy, and he's broadcasting in the context of this democracy.
But the power of that
Not in a
scene
vacuum.
is that he lets the airman speak for himself. He doesn't interpose his own view on that scene.
But
And
attacking
that's why it
misinformation and
succeeds with the
disinformation.
audience.